A lot of people bought this stock during the Iran situation, right? And they left when the headline faded. The interesting part is that none of what actually makes this project valuable ever had anything to do with that. So I want to walk through what the thesis really built on, and I can't think of a better person to do it with than Mayo Schmidt, who's here with me today.
Good to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mayo Schmidt is actually the executive chairman of Brazil Potash. So if you wanted to, have one person in the room that really knows this topic better than anyone else about global fertilizer, it's Mayo. Before Brazil Potash, Mayo was the chairman and CEO of Nutrien, which is the largest fertilizer company in the world. And before that, he built Viterra into $7 billion global agribusiness across 14 countries. And then he also ran Hydro One through one of the largest public listings in Canada's history. So when we talk about what actually moves the markets, Mayo's seen it all from the very top of the industry. So Mayo, thanks again for doing this, and looking forward to jumping in.
It's a real pleasure and such an important topic for today's environment.
Absolutely. So the thing that most people, most people miss about demand is how a Brazilian farmer actually decides. He doesn't read the news to size his fertilizer order. He looks at one ratio. And that ratio is how many bags of soybeans it costs him to buy 1 ton of potash. And in Brazil, they call it the relação de troca, or the barter ratio. So when that ratio works, he buys, whether there's a war or no war. And Brazil is now the swing grower for the world's food, right? And the marginal hectare that feeds the planet is increasingly right here where I'm located today. So structural potash demand comes out of the ground in Mato Grosso and Mato Piba, and it's not just a headline. So Mayo, you ran this business at a global scale. When a geopolitical headline moves the potash price, how much of that is noise versus the real demand signal coming from acres and crop economics?
Well, very good question. And, I think the important thing is global potash demand is structural. It's not headline driven. Food demand, soil nutrient loss, and modern farming practices, it continues to support the long-term growth. And potash is the resilience nutrient. When you think about yields, how it strengthens crop against disease and environmental stress, how it becomes more important during weather volatility, which we're seeing extraordinary volatility right now. When we call Brazil the swing grower for global food supply, it's because it has the abundant land, the water, the climate, the advantages that other countries just simply don't have and simply won't change. So it has a central role in feeding the world and solving some of the deficits we have in the world with almost 500 million people living on less than one meal a day, and the growing populations that Brazil will be the foundation of feeding. So right now, we think that Brazil potash is localizing this essential nutrient, and for the countries most responsible for incremental global agriculture supply, which is Brazil.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And right now there's a strong El Nino building right now inside the growing season this year, right? So what does that kind of weather stress actually do to crops' need for potassium?
Well, it certainly stresses the plant, and what potash does is create a stronger, more resilient plant that can harvest the moisture from the soil. It can also, when it has to go deeper, it also protects it when there's too much rain. But the potash is just a multi-faceted structural nutrient for the soil and then for the plant.
That's a great insight. And the part you don't see from a screen is the logistics. I had the opportunity to visit Autazes, which is the location of the Brazil Potash site right outside of Manaus on the Madeira River. I was able to visit there at the end of April, so I'm very familiar with the project, and I've seen all the great work you guys are doing. So I think what most people don't realize, though, there's a company called Hermasa, which is the river arm of the Maggi family, that already runs this corridor. And they send about 8.5 million tons of grain down the river every year. And only about 700,000 tons come back up. So that asymmetrical misbalance is, that is something that most people don't price. The return trip is mostly empty. So one of the things I really love about what you guys are doing is that Brazil Potash locked the empty backhaul for the first 15 to 17 years. And so they move potash up the river, which you guys do, on barges that are going to make that trip anyway. And by the company's own numbers, the transport leg runs about $53 a ton, and an importer pays more than that just for the truck ride from southern ports after the product has already crossed an ocean. And that's one thing you can't do is you can't rebuild 30 years of Maggie's River infrastructure. Like that is what I see as the strategical moat of what you guys are doing is the logistics arbitrage. So on that global cost curve, how much of what a farmer actually pays for potash is the molecule itself versus the freight to get it into his field?
Well, you make a great point. The Madeira River creates a logistical arbitrage slash opportunity that just simply can't be replicated. When you think about potash today, 98% of Brazil's supply, which is a critical mineral for Brazil, coming halfway around the world when we're faced with port congestions, port strikes, weather-related issues, geopolitical risk, wars that are happening regionally in the world today. Simply put, the proximity to the Mato Grosso being 2 days away and the security of supply to our Brazil farmers is just it's defined and it can't be replicated. And the cost associated with that. So when a farmer's saying 2 to 3 times a year, I've got to grow a crop, so I've got to put fertilizer down, potash 2 to 3 times a year. We have such a materially lower cost base. So it's a logistical advantage that simply exists because we're in market. And to your good point about the backhauls, these barges have been running for many years empty back, which is simply, it's at a cost that can't be recovered. And now we can fill those barges with fertilizer, and then it's fertilizer one way, grain the other. It's a natural moat that gets built versus bringing product from halfway around the world. Really protects the profits of the lowest cost providers in Brazil. So it's an advantage to the farmers that just keeps giving over and over and over for the life cycle, which will be hundreds of years of a supply that is a massive basin that was discovered and is now being developed. So it's an advantage that's not just the mining cost, it's all the other things that go with it, but the logistical advantages are undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes so much sense, and there's a natural synergy there between the barges going down and then coming back up with the other product, right? So I'd love to talk a little bit more about the supply security now is being framed as a policy question, right? So let's take demand and the cost edge and put them against the real exposure. The U.S. gets most of its potash from a friendly neighbor at zero tariff, right, which is Canada. Brazil imports more than 95% of its potash, and not from a friendly neighbor. It comes from Canada, Russia, and Belarus. So what's new is that Brazil is finally doing something about it. They import 85% of its fertilizers, 95% of its potash, and currently there's a bill called Profert moving through the Brazilian Congress right now that puts real public money behind domestic fertilizer. They've really stressed the importance and the need for this, right? And it includes financing authority through the National Development Bank, which is BNDES. And in late May, President Lula was actually in Manaus, about 100 kilometers from the project. And he personally defended potash production in the state in the free trade zone the project sits inside. The same week that bill cleared the lower house. So Mayo, you've built the North American potash business. The U.S. just put potash recently on its critical minerals list, which I think is one of the only fertilizers on that list. And it draws roughly 4/5 of its imports from Canada. And that arrangement goes into the USMCA review, what Canada calls CUSMA on July 1st. So how real is that supply security concern?
Yeah, well, the potash from a fertilizer issue has really moved to a national security and a trade policy issue. And as you point out, the U.S. depends heavily upon Canadian potash, and the replacement for the Canadian potash to a degree, and only to a degree, would be Russian and Belarus, which again brings in matters of conflict. So when you think about the North American food security issues, they're significant. And when you think about Brazil's dependence is even deeper, importing nearly all of its potash, a balance of it from Canada, a balance of it from Belarus, and a balance from Russia, which ultimately ends up being about 98% of their supply. So they're, almost entirely dependent on foreign supplies, which we've talked about, transportation, logistics, the shipping, the cost of shipping, the fertilizer, the insurance for ships in this time of conflict. So you're correct that Brazil's national fertilizer plan for the industry is ProFert, and the BNDES financing authority has showed that the domestic fertilizer supply is now a government priority. So trade realignment is already pointing toward more Canadian tons toward Brazil, but Brazil's longest and strongest answer has got to be domestic production for security. And certainly the Canadian and Belarus and the Russian tons come at a much higher cost to Brazilian farmers, which they bear trying to recover their cost of production when fertilizer is going up and soybean values are going down. It makes it really difficult for them. So Brazil Potash gives Brazil a local supply solution instead of simply shifting dependence from one foreign supplier to another, which is not an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the part that cuts towards Brazil, as you mentioned. If those U.S. and Canada flows get disrupted, the Canadian tons have to go somewhere. And Brazil is already the second largest buyer of Canadian potash and growing. So the trade fight doesn't ease Brazil's dependence, it actually deepens it.
Well, and I would add that, you know, when it has to go elsewhere, one would argue, well, it can go to Brazil, and it can. But when you look at domestic production in Brazil, it being half the cost of production from around the world, it means that the foreign suppliers simply stop producing and stop shipping, because they're not going to ship potash at below their cost of production. And at below their cost of production, Brazil Potash still makes $500 million a year in EBITDA at that price. So we're in a logistical advantage position that is not replicable.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And specifically on the ground, the project recently it continues to de-risk, right? While the stock is currently slightly down, right? So if you look at the stock, it might be not be telling the whole story, but the key licenses are in hand, and the company's reached an agreement with the local Mura community to move forward. I think it's more than 30 of the local communities there, and I was at the event in late April, and it's great to see all the local support and the great work you guys are doing in the community in terms of providing, you know, education, sanitation, jobs. So I can see why they accept this project, because really they don't have anything else there that is helping move their communities forward. So the local leaders are really, fully behind the project, which I think is super important, because that really is a big deterrent for a lot of projects here in Brazil is the indigenous community. So I really love to see that. And on the commercial side, Brazil Potash recently signed a definitive offtake for another 900,000 tons with Key Trade on top of a large pre-sold book. I think it's over 90% pre-sold. You guys left a few percentage points just to sell at market, so you have some wiggle room. And the free trade zone registration kits save up to, I think, $94 million on the construction phase. And you guys have mandated BTIG, which is the New York Investment Bank, to lead the construction financing in a way built to limit how much shareholders are diluted. So the price moved one direction on a theme, and the project moved the other direction on facts. So I'm curious, you've built and run mines. Where does the real risk actually live in a greenfield potash project, and what does finishing the engineering, the feed this month actually take off the table?
Well, the broader de-risking stack, as you talked about, is already visible. We've got permitting progress, the water license, the port site preparations all underway. The indigenous engagement has been extraordinary. The reception that we've had in market for jobs, bringing renewable power to places that are diesel generation, if they even have power, which also provides ability to pump water from the aquifers, which they haven't had the benefit of doing. So fresh water, which of course supports digestive systems, better health, and the offtake and financing partnerships are all moving very, very quickly and very visible. So as you point out, we've already pre-sold 91% of the production over the course of the next average of 12 to 17 years. So those customers, those farmers are already covered. They're not looking for, once we begin production, third-party supply. They've already bought their supply up to the next 17 years. And to your good point, we're just over 90% sold. It keeps 10% for spot sales when someone runs into difficulty, because we're only 2 days from market versus 107 days versus other suppliers. So we add those up and taking the financing progress we made, which includes the support we've had in the royalty structure, the equity that's coming in, and then the infrastructure carve out. It supports a path to construction. And as you point out, the feed of the front end engineering design, which is now well underway. So we're really very much a company that's been priced like a pre-production story when the assets increasingly look like, permitted, contracted, nationally strategic infrastructure project. So it's created a disconnect, but we're dealing with that as the opportunity to meet with our customers, to sell the potash, as well as investors that getting visibility over the great progress that's been made to date.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And one of the things I was actually most surprised about when I saw there as well, it's something so simple, but I think it's so valuable, is you guys have also helped provide Starlink internet to them as well. In terms of just getting them connected to the outside world, which when I was there, you see everyone on their phones, and, they're on Instagram and Facebook, and they're sending messages, WhatsApp. So like little things like that make a huge difference, and it really gets the community behind the project, which I think you guys have done a great job.
Well, the fact is they're joining with the rest of the world while protecting their natural resource and participating in both. So it's a win-win situation for everyone, and we're proud to have been able to provide that, and we'll continue to provide that. And the reception, as you know, when you went down and visited, is just extraordinary in the indigenous communities. The idea to have the opportunity to enjoy what we all have in terms of the conveniences of fresh water, food available to them for more than one meal a day. It's just an extraordinary improvement in their lifestyles while we protect the natural environment they live in. And keeping in mind that the potash is going to be hydroelectric, used to run the plant. All the products, the fertilizer and the separation of the salt from the potassium murate is all natural. And what isn't used goes back underground where it came from. So it's an all natural process, other than we've got a 34-acre plant that has to be developed in order to produce the potash. And once that's developed, we're in good condition to produce and in an all natural environment. It's all protected.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just one quick thing to add on that is also maintaining the local culture and the customs too. Is the people there are very proud of their local culture, their music, their way of dress, the way they're speaking. They have their own indigenous languages, and I think that's important to note is that a company like Brazil Potash isn't coming in trying to change the way that their lives are the way their culture is. The company is there to help improve their lives, give them opportunities, and to increase development so they continue to be who they are, but to improve and to really advance their community and their long-term benefits.
Yeah, this project protects that future for them that they care so much about, and the environment they live in. And that's exactly what this project does, is protects that for future generations.
Absolutely. And I think the simplest version is this, right? So the way I look at it, it's a project that needs billions to build, right? But it's trading at a fraction of that today. I'm not going to sit here and put a number on the stock. That's not my area of expertise. I look at the fundamentals, and everything is aligning for this project to be built and to be very, very successful, from my own opinion, right? So what I'll say is that the thing that closes a gap like that is the financing. And, currently, as I see it, the financing path is visible through BTIG and potentially through the development bank under that new program. So I'll leave the investing conclusions to other people, but what do you see as the next catalyst to really to get this project built and producing?
Well, the next catalyst simply is going to be some of the build, own, operate, and transfer. We're well underway in those discussions, whether it's the power line, the port, and the plant, which doesn't put pressure on our investors. So that's a very, very positive story. And then simply the support we have from the international banking institutions and the low cost of capital puts us in a fantastic position. So with the next tranche of equity, we should be in a great position to move forward.
That's great. And we'll close on this. So most people are left trading a headline. What we've already talked about here, and what I see is what's left is really it's a logistics asset, a supply problem that the government is now moving to fund, and a project that got more de-risked month by month. and not less, right? So that's where the part that really compounds, and why I believe, and why I decided to work with you guys as an advisor, because I really do believe in this project. I think I see it as a fundamental necessity for Brazil to have that domestic production of fertilizer, and you guys are the ones here to do it. So, Mayo, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. I really hope anyone that's watching this gets a chance to really dive in and see all the great work that Brazil Potash is doing. You can always check out my article I wrote about my experience in Autazes, as well as some of the updates that come throughout. But thanks again, Mayo.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Discussions like this support the path to development and is in everybody's best interest in the world today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.